Hey everyone, and welcome to the Hormone Genius podcast. We are so excited for today's episode because I'll be doing a question and answer with Teresa. So something that Teresa and I love to do, well, I should say I specifically am obsessed with it, is I love to learn from Teresa. So we kind of organize our podcast based on content, interviews, and then these Q&As. So we're going to do a Q&A on perimenopause today, and I get to ask Teresa all the questions in my mind, and we've also collected questions from our listeners as well. So if there are questions that we do not get to, please be sure to visit our website, hormonegenius.com. There's a little piece at the bottom of the website where you could submit a question or a thought, or you could email us directly at thehormonegenius@gmail.com for further questions. And maybe we will do a 2.0 sometime in the future if we get enough of those questions. So without further ado, Teresa, are you ready for today's Q&A?
I think I'm ready. Like I'm almost like nervous about doing this one. And maybe it's because it is so like close to like my heart, and because I'm perimenopausal, like, or at least I'm at that age where I could be. And I know so many women want to know all the answers. You know, they want to know, what do I do? Or how do I like figure out this whole perimenopause thing? So I'm kind of nervous, but super excited. And I know you're going to have lots of stuff to share too, because I know you've got some gems with helping women as well. So this is just going to be an awesome episode.
It's going to be awesome. And so many women have so many questions. And I just think that this is a topic that isn't talked about enough. It's just not talked about enough.
Totally.
And, you know, it's like, it seems like once we are done with our childbearing years, culturally, it kind of, I believe that women likely feel like, you know, their voice doesn't matter maybe as much in terms of their hormones and that kind of thing. So I really want to make sure that we're empowering women to know that your life doesn't end, you know, as you reach menopause and beyond, it doesn't end. And again, this specific episode will be regarding perimenopause, but we'll touch into menopause and probably a little bit beyond that too. So yeah, this is a topic that is definitely needed. There needs to be noise around this.
You know, I was just talking to a patient this week, and she told me, you know, I've never felt like once I stopped having my children that my OBGYN listened to me anymore. Mm-hmm. So just to reiterate what you just said, I do think there is this kind of like, you go to the OBGYN, and if you're either you don't want babies, then you need birth control. And if you do want babies, okay, I'll help you with your prenatal care and deliver your baby. But outside of that, there's like, don't really listen to your other problems. And when you get to 40, it's kind of like, good, you know, whatever, you know, deal with it. Yeah. Sorry. Mm-hmm. So this is something I think a lot of women feel a lot of frustration with and want answers. And hopefully we can provide some tools, some practical help, but also just kind of the awareness and understanding that you're not alone in this as well. I mean, so many women go through changes. It's all individual to the person. So, you know, every unique person needs a unique treatment as well.
Yeah, I love that. So to start, Teresa, tell the listeners, what is perimenopause?
Well, I just recently heard that they sometimes refer to it as reverse puberty, which I had never heard about that before. But if you think about it, it does make kind of sense. So in the beginning of our reproductive lives, when we go through puberty, there is about, and we've talked about this before, 4 to 6 years of kind of reproductive maturation that occurs. And we can talk about how, you know, there's so many changes through puberty, right? And your cycles may not be regular, and, you know, give it some time to work out the kinks. And then you go through your, you know, main reproductive years, which is, you know, from the age of probably 19 to 35, when you're kind of your most fertile, you could say, really healthy cycles. And then at the end of the spectrum, perimenopause, what is that? It is basically the kind of, you know, quieting down or the stopping of the reproductive system. And so you will go through another like 4 to 6 years of hormonal change, just like you did at the beginning. Mm-hmm. And how a woman knows she's in that period of time? Well, of course, you can know just by age. You know, once you hit 35, there's definitely we know a decline in fertility, like our ability to reproduce. Therefore, we know there is some sort of hormonal change that occurs, or a physical change in our body. But most women, I would say, don't experience actual perimenopause until their 40s. Sometimes around 44 to, I would say, 46 is kind of the magic age where a lot of women, if they're going to notice significant change in symptoms, it might be right around that age. But that's just an average. So it can be different, again, for every person. So again, perimenopause, average 4 to 6 years before you truly hit full menopause. And the definition of full menopause is 1 full year with absolutely no menstrual cycles, is what is the definition of actual menopause. And the average age of menopause is 51. So again, there's always a bell curve around that.
Mm-hmm. Okay. I get the question sometimes on, if I had a hysterectomy or I don't have a uterus, how do I know that I have gone even through menopause? Like,
It's a
where's
great
the data? How
question.
do we know? Yeah.
Yeah. So I would say it's almost like you have 2 menopauses. When you have a hysterectomy, let's say you had a hysterectomy at 40, 41, something like that, you do go through what we call a surgical menopause. Now, even if you have your ovaries left inside your body, which a lot of women will do, they'll have their doctors recommend leaving their ovaries to give them some sort of hormonal support. There still is a dramatic change in hormones.
Mm-hmm.
You can't kind of manipulate physically the body that extremely without there being some consequences hormonally. So a lot of women who have surgical menopause will still experience symptoms that are hormonal change symptoms. So there is a sense that that is kind of a menopause itself, but it's actually not true menopause, because true menopause is essentially when the pituitary gland stops speaking completely to the ovaries. And we know that if you still have your ovaries and you had a hysterectomy at 40 or 41, your ovaries can still communicate with your pituitary if you still are producing those gonadotropin hormones. So there is still your own hormonal production. I even have women tell me that they can almost tell when they ovulate per se, even though they don't have any signs of ovulation, right? At least not the typical cervical mucus signs, but they can tell because they feel that hormonal shift.
Mm-hmm.
But true menopause, again, happens when those ovaries stop communicating with the pituitary. And that's why when we measure, hormones to tell a woman if she's in menopause, it is her pituitary hormones that tell us that. And that is the follicle stimulating hormone and the luteinizing hormone, otherwise known as FSH and LH. So when we want to say, okay, do we know if you're close to menopause or are you in menopause? We measure those 2 hormones because that tells us that those ovaries have stopped communicating with your pituitary gland, and those numbers will go up high because it's like trying to scream the message at your ovaries. Hey, you're not listening, ovaries. Hey, you're not listening, ovaries.
Mm-hmm.
And so the messenger hormone keeps going up, very similar to thyroid. So that's where kind of, again, that change occurs. But if you had a hysterectomy and you still have your ovaries, you still may function with ovaries to some degree, although I would say there's still some hormonal imbalances that can occur. But you don't go through true menopause until those ovaries stop talking to your pituitary. And again, that average age would be about 50 to 51. And so a lot of women will, even with a hysterectomy, go through menopause and all of a sudden feel this massive shift in hormones around that age, even if they had a hysterectomy when they were younger.
So what if they got a complete hysterectomy? No ovaries, no uterus, nothing.
Yeah. So that is true, absolute surgical menopause. And you're right. So now we don't have ovaries to talk to pituitary gland anymore. So our ovaries aren't producing hormones. Now you still produce hormones like estrogen, a little bit from your adrenals, a little bit from other endocrine glands, but it's going to be way, way less. So that's going to cause real direct menopausal symptoms right away. And those people, especially if they had a total hysterectomy when they were younger, are going to need hormonal support because it is a very unnatural state to the body for that to occur. And that generally doesn't feel real well for women in terms of how they feel too. Now, this is the interesting part because I've said, I've seen patients like this, and I still think they go through another change around 51. So I still think what they'll notice is, and whether it has to do with, some other, again, adrenal changes or endocrine changes, there is this change that occurs between 51, even if you had your ovaries removed when you were younger. So women will feel that. And a lot of times we have to support them in that phase as well.
Okay, that's so such important information. So you're welcome to everyone who asked that question as we prepared for this episode. So many people asked that. So to recap, if you have your ovaries still, for those who had a hysterectomy, FSH, LH, those levels will be elevated, right? Teresa, because they're like yelling at the ovaries, and that's how they'll know. Is that right?
Yes. I mean, in terms of when you get to menopause.
Yes.
Yeah. Yep. So
Yep.
those will go up. Yep.
Those will go up. Okay, very good. Okay, so what would you say is the most common symptom of perimenopause into menopause? Like, what's the number one, or maybe give us the top three? What are the top three issues that most women experience? And then we can talk about ways to naturally kind of address those things too.
Sure. So I would say the top three are fatigue, mood changes. It's hard to even give a top three. Fatigue, mood changes, and weight gain are three big ones that people come in with. There's also, it's just like, it's a not feeling well. I mean, we think of women in their 40s, their children are older, but they're still running the rat race.
Mm-hmm.
There's a lot of stress on their lives. A lot of women in their 40s, their parents are aging. There's a lot of stress on us taking care of aging parents. It can just be a really stressful time. And so I hear this a lot from women in their 40s. And what's frustrating is that women are trying to take care of themselves. Many times they're exercising, they're trying to eat nutritiously, but they're still seeing these symptoms like weight gain. Like, I just feel tired, I feel brain foggy, I feel restless, I don't sleep well at night. I'm so tired, I have no energy for sex, whether it be actual loss of sex drive or just I'm so tired, I just don't, feel like it.
Mm-hmm.
They just don't feel like themselves. And it's almost like they look in the mirror someday and they're just like, I don't know this person anymore, and it's not what they expected to happen when, and I feel this way. I'm like, I can't believe I'm 45. It's hard for me to even say that because I think of my mom when she was 45. What did we think when our parents were 45? Man, you're super old.
Yeah, totally.
So you're like, I'm 45. I'm like, I don't feel like I should be 45. And so we want to be as young and youthful and vibrant and active with our, family life as possible. And so that's why women get so frustrated by perimenopausal symptoms, because it's like, what? Like, this shouldn't be happening to me. I don't feel that old.
Right. Yeah. Do you think that, I was listening to a podcast the other day, they were talking about how, women are going through menopause and then into the menopause time and then beyond, and how, they just don't feel right. Like you were explaining, like, who is this woman looking at me in the mirror? But really, it's like thinking about what's the root cause of such hormone imbalance. Of course, our body now is shutting down the ovarian factory, the estrogen that makes us feel so alive and healthy and energized, the progesterone that makes us feel calm and relaxed. I mean, those are taking a huge hit. So because of that, Teresa, will you explain the importance of our other glands and the production of hormones that we can really try to leverage and utilize, and the importance of the health of those, so that women may not have to have such a terrible experience?
Yeah. Well, and you've said this before, Jamie, it's often a symphony of hormones, right? We look at, the adrenals, the thyroid, the ovarian hormones, those are all playing together. And when one is playing badly, it's hard to play well when all you hear is a lot of bad noise.
Yeah.
So it is true that we need to look at like all of the endocrine glands and how they're functioning together. And our hormones are the key to what make us either feel well or not feel well in so many ways. So one of the things that a lot of people talk about is the adrenal system, and how the adrenals can basically kind of make or break in some ways how our other hormones function.
Mm-hmm.
And in perimenopause, what happens, like you said, is our estrogen tends to decline and our progesterone levels tend to decline, which actually can raise cortisol, which also gets, cortisol gets raised by that stress I was talking about, which often women are under in their ages 35 and beyond. Mm-hmm. And so this cortisol is basically creating a dysregulation or a disruption in other hormone balance. Mm-hmm. And a lot of women will feel, again, this is where the weight gain becomes an issue, because cortisol raises blood sugar. And this is, you hear cortisol and a lot of times you think, oh, cortisol all bad. It's not bad. It's like probably the most vital hormone in our body. It's survival hormone. We need it on a daily basis to regulate blood pressure in our heart and everything. But too much of a good thing is too much of a good thing sometimes. And so as cortisol raises, our metabolism can actually slow down. Our blood sugar goes up and we get this resistant weight gain that's really difficult for women, especially when they are doing everything they can. It is not a situation of calories in, calories out anymore, because those hormonal changes are making us metabolically resistant to weight loss. And so we really have to, I always say, kind of fool the body. We have to, use some really tricks of the trade to get the body to really, up the game in terms of metabolism. So again, the adrenals. So cortisol is a main player in this disruption of perimenopause. Then the thyroid is the other one. Mm-hmm. So oftentimes as the other hormones decline, thyroid struggles to function optimally. So this is something where women really need to talk to their doctors about thyroid symptoms, because if you're feeling cold all the time and you're losing your hair and you're gaining weight and you're feeling depressed, the thyroid is a main player in this. And if we don't have an optimum thyroid, we're still going to be resistant to weight loss no matter what we do. So thyroid is also a main player in that as well. And gut health, it tends to decline with age. Our bodies, when we're young, we can eat as much crap as we want to. And sometimes we can survive the gut problems. But by the time you're 35, I think a lot of people notice irritable bowel symptoms. Mm-hmm. And we know that the gut is super important to our neurotransmitter hormones in our brain, like serotonin. And so if the gut is functioning poorly, then our other hormones really just aren't working well either. So that there's that piece of the puzzle too. So like everything, it's such a holistic thing. And so you have to look at the individual person, look at what their symptoms are and where possibly they could be coming from. And it takes a real, effort to kind of move things in the right direction.
Totally. Something that I think about a lot is with cortisol, which again is the hormone being produced by the adrenals. I think about how, so cortisol instigates that like fight or flight, right? It's like the stress hormone that helps us survive, like Teresa was saying. And sometimes in life, things get stressful to us and it kind of instigates that fight or flight feeling. But maybe what's causing that stress is something that someone said about you. Not that a bear is chasing you in the woods, which is what that cortisol is meant to help us survive. Like, that's the reason for that, is to help us survive. But because of the cortisol spike that tend to happen more so these days in instances where we're not running from a bear, maybe we're triggered easily. Maybe we're worried about how other people think of us. Maybe there's a lot on our plate, like Teresa was saying, with aging parents, and whatever the case is, we feel our heart start to race, our palms start to sweat, and we want to kind of escape the scenario. But something I think about a lot is as cortisol is increasing, it shuts down our secondary functions, hormone production, digestion. And so with increased cortisol, how do we manage our cortisol so that we don't always flip into fight or flight, so that our digestive tract can continue working, so that even hormonally, because that's a hijacker too, is cortisol. So how would you say, what are the recommendations you typically make to your patients?
Yeah, well, I wish I could say it's like some sort of a magic pill I could all give every woman in perimenopause and make it all better. Yeah. But of course, it's never that simple. Right. So if you think about cortisol, like you're speaking as this fight or flight hormone, and how there's so much noise that we have, and we have to quiet that noise, basically. Mm-hmm. So stress response and dealing with our body's own stress response is probably one of the most important things. Mm-hmm. And that's probably one of the hardest things for people to make a change in, because, it's difficult to remove stressors like aging parents when you're the one taking care of them, or difficult children, relationship issues, marriage issues, things like that. Right. But you have to find a way, at least in your day, to find a place where you can even imagine that your adrenals need to be quieted. Mm-hmm. And so that means deep breathing. It means meditation or prayer. It means exercise, or, not even like heavy exercise, but just walking, putting your feet on the ground and movement. So there's so many things that in terms of that stress response, we have to do to quiet it. I love to listen to like podcasts that quiet my brain. So I have this one called Discerning Hearts that I listen to. And if I'm having a particularly worrisome day, I will put it on just as I fall asleep, because it's peaceful to me. We know that women in perimenopause, actually their cortisol levels are higher while they sleep. And who isn't, I mean, we can all as women identify as the woman who's sitting there worrying at night. You wake up and you're like, I don't have any milk for cereal tomorrow morning. I'm so worried about like making sure I get everything done the next day. You've got this stressor. I mean, women tend to like let their brain go overactive. And of course, we don't sleep as well because of all that.
Right.
And that disrupts the circadian rhythms. So sleep, and that's a second one I would say. So we've got to deal with stress response, and we have to have coping mechanisms. We have to find a way to sleep. I cannot tell women how important so often like sleep is. And the good news is most of the time, by the time you're 35 and your 40s, you don't have the babies anymore. But here's the deal. Those babies that you had for years, they disrupted your cortisol response also, because you were up at night surviving with them and breastfeeding them. So you've already disrupted that pattern. So we really have to work the body back into a healthy sleep pattern. So getting to sleep at a good time and getting 7 to plus hours of sleep is absolutely necessary. And it has to be good, restful sleep. And this is where with my patients, I use a lot of progesterone, bioidentical progesterone, which is amazing for sleep, and magnesium. So magnesium and progesterone, are just two things that you can take to help with sleep. The other one would be melatonin. But we have to find a way to get that prolonged amount of sleep. And we have to help balance those hormones. So again, the next piece would be doing hormone testing, finding out where the imbalances are, helping to restore some of those imbalances. Yes, you can restore some of your hormones through lifestyle and change in those habits, but some women really just need that support to their body. And progesterone being one of the best ones, because it induces basically like the serotonin, like feeling, that happy hormone, that decrease anxiety in our body, that restfulness in sleep, the clarity of mind that so many women are looking for. Progesterone can do that for the vast majority of women. So that's a big one. And then diet would be like the last piece. We could talk all day about diet, but maybe you could chime in on just what diet does for in terms of health and perimenopause.
Yeah, totally. Well, we know that with hormone issues, xenoestrogens cause hormone hijack too. So it's kind of like, the way I think about it is, okay, we want to leverage the hormones that our body does make. We want to leverage that. So we want to take care of our adrenals. But another way of leveraging the hormones that our body does make is to make sure that the actual estrogen, for instance, that we're producing is actually binding to our estrogen receptors. But what happens in life when we're younger, but then even as we age, is xenoestrogens, which are found in synthetic birth control hormones, synthetic hormones, like canned food, the air we breathe, the water we drink, stuff we put on our face, what we put in our hair, if we're not using natural things, if they can be toxic to our body, and we can't escape it. That's an everyday thing for us, but we can diminish it and decrease it by really trying to clean with a natural cleaner. Get your lemon essential oil and your vinegar, like clean the counters with that. Don't clean with Clorox. Clean your windows, not with Windex, but something else. Because when you were younger, maybe it wasn't as big of a deal, but now we want to limit the xenoestrogens. Xenoestrogens are like estrogen hijackers. They take the place of natural estrogen. They act like estrogen in the body, but we know that it's not, and it does not make us feel good. So that's one thing, is I would say making sure that you're eating well, but then also living well in terms of what's in your home. and also that you're including plenty of fiber in your diet so that you can pass stools because all these toxic-y things that your liver is filtering through needs to be passed out of us. And if they're not, that also creates like an estrogen dominant sort of thing. And if estrogen is dominant, progesterone is not, like progesterone that the adrenals are making. So we want to really leverage the hormones that our body is making. And another thing if you guys do like using essential oils or herbs, those are just you can look online, PubMed, go anywhere to research it, but there is very, very solid proof that essential oils are very relaxing. They use it for aromatherapy. So diffusing essential oils at your bedside, directly inhaling them into your, like putting a couple drops into your palm and directly inhaling them through your nose for 30 seconds, that will decrease cortisol because there's olfactory nerves in our nose and it connects to our olfactory bulb in our limbic system. And that is like our, managing point for our mood, and it can help calm us. And also they can help uplift us. So if you want to learn more about that, message us because we can kind of share some recommendations there too.
What are, Jamie, just like, your top, because I know you love essential oils, but like for you, if you're stressed or something, what are your top, aromas that you like to use to de-stress?
Yeah, it's all based on the person's preference, but I would say if somebody is needing calming, anything that's a floral or a wood. So woods, like frankincense is a wood, cedar wood, sandalwood, any woods are grounding. So pick any of the woods and you would know that throughout the day, if you need calming or relaxing, to use a wood. Like I love to use frankincense throughout the day. Cedar wood is also one of my favorites, patchouli. And then in the evening, if you're needing to rest and get some good sleep, then you would use florals. So florals are like a sedative. They have a sedative effect. So you wouldn't want to use florals throughout your day because you won't remember anything and you'll be too relaxed. Mm-hmm. So you can ground yourself, but then use florals at night, and then that will help you sleep. So lavender, rose, Roman chamomile, clary sage, any floral that you just have a preference of. Some people don't like certain smells, but I always say your body knows what it wants. So I would say, talk to a friend that who have oils. What I was talking about earlier with the toxicity is there are essential oils that are somewhat toxic because of how they're sourced with weed killers and pesticides and things. So not all essential oils are created equal. It's very important you know that. There's no FDA regulation on oils. So you don't know what you're buying, honestly. Same thing with vitamins over the counter. You don't really know. So just be sure you use a trusted source, experiment first from the oils that your friends have at their house, see what you like. But yeah, I'd say florals in the evening for bed, woods during the day for grounding.
It kind of makes sense because I know just walking in nature and when I'm outside and I'm smelling the trees, it just makes you feel grounded and peaceful to be in nature. So that makes sense.
You know that there's a word for that? Can I tell you? I just learned it this summer. Forest bathing. Did you know that?
No.
It's called forest bathing. Forest bathing. I'm like,
I hope you wear clothes in that situation.
Well, I hope so. My friend was like, I'm going to go forest bathe. I'm like, what are you talking about? It means walking in the woods. I'm like, oh, cool. # forest bathing. Anyway.
Well, that's all really good advice. And I know the Environmental Working Group is another good site for finding makeups that don't have chemicals in them or the xenoestrogens. In fact, that, anything in terms of toxins, the Environmental Working Group is a good website to go to. They research all of that stuff.
Oh, awesome.
Yeah. And so, okay, I know, so there's just so much. I feel like this episode, we're going to go a little longer. I have a feeling, but I want to talk about cycle changes, Jamie, because a lot of women will notice, their periods change. And of course, we're really passionate about women understanding their fertility from the first standpoint of charting their cycles. So this is really important. It's important for family planning reasons. It's important because those changes that we see beyond 35 can help identify when those hormonal imbalances occur. So I want to talk about that. Just in terms of you being a charting teacher, I guess, do you have an experience of working with someone, in their 40s where you're like, wow, look what this change and, kind of helping someone through that?
Totally. Yes, I have. And the main things I notice, and even just in terms of what we've been trained in, and Teresa, how you started this episode is, this reverse puberty sort of deal. So when a young woman is getting her period, her cycles are somewhat irregular, and that's to be expected. And that's a whole other episode, of a young girl getting her period. She has irregular cycles. They freak out and they get put on the pill. That's a whole other episode, but and it's a really sad thing because that's normal. So just like it's normal for the first 3 to 5 years, whatever, when you get your period, that your cycle is not super regular, the same thing is true as you are kind of entering out of or exiting out of the fertile years. Mm-hmm. So I can actually speak to clients, but I can also just speak to myself, even as a cycling woman. I've noticed so much in the last 2 years, especially over the last year, that my cycle is very different than it was. Mid-cycle, you have very fertile mucus that indicates ovulation. My cervical mucus is decreasing so much. I hardly have any of it anymore. My cycle length is varying as well. So normally my cycles were pretty stable, although that doesn't have to be the case for every woman, but for me it was. And now they're getting much shorter. Mm-hmm. My cycles are much shorter. And I'm not bleeding as heavily or even as much as I was before. So just even because it's fresh in my mind, even for me, those are the changes I'm seeing. I just turned 36 this year. And so it makes sense in terms of what Teresa was explaining, that those are the changes that I'm seeing. Yeah. I also am paying very close attention to any mid-cycle spotting I may see, because that is also something we really want to make sure women are paying attention to. Any unusual bleeding mid-cycle is definitely a reason to see a doctor. And I just got to say that because of you could talk a bit more as to why that would be important.
Yeah. Yeah. So those are all really typical changes, Jamie, that we see in after 35. You're still kind of right at the cusp of the change, but so every woman, again, when they see these things, it may be different, but I would say the first thing women see is shortening of cycles. And that is because we tend to ovulate earlier when we're beyond 35. And this is really important from a family planning perspective. I always joke with my patients that a lot of caboose babies happen in the plus 35. And the reason is because women have gotten used to ovulating day 13, day 14, day 15. And all of a sudden they ovulate on day 9 or 10, and they see maybe the mucus there, but in their mind, they're like, well, that's not possible. Right. I don't have mucus right after my period. It can't be, it's obviously not ovulation. And they realize that it is ovulation when they get a positive pregnancy test. And I always joke that those are the happiest of additions to families, as well as a caboose baby in that situation. But in the rhythm method days, when family planning was based around just calculating days of fertility on retrospective cycles and just knocking those days off on a calendar, caboose babies happened a lot because of this fact that women ovulate earlier in premenopause. So you're going to notice shorter cycles, 23 to 25 days, not uncommon to see, sometimes even shorter. We have to ask always, is there any changes that could say that luteal phase where the progesterone is made is deficient? So for example, I had a patient this week that came to me and she's 46. And for the first time, she's noticing premenstrual bleeding. So before her period starts, she's like, I'm spotting 3 days before my bleeding gets going. Well, that's a change associated with lowering of progesterone. So she was able to, identify that, and we can test for that if we, want to check the progesterone levels. Some women get lighter with their periods, but some women get really heavy with their periods. And that can be an unpleasant situation in perimenopause itself. So a lot of my management of the 40s is management of heavy bleeding in periods. Mm-hmm. And the good news about that is you don't need birth control. A lot of women would go to their doctors and be offered birth control for heavy bleeding in perimenopause, but you actually don't need birth control in that situation. It can be managed with bioidentical progesterone. In almost every situation I've ever managed, it can be managed with progesterone. And there also is, The magic trick I always say with heavy periods is 800 milligrams of ibuprofen every 8 hours on those, 1-2 heavy days that are the ones that you really worry about kind of heading out to the grocery store with. That is very, very effective and safe to do for those couple of days. So heavy bleeding is important. A lot of that is associated with just the changes in perimenopause in terms of the hormones, but also thyroid disorder, fibroids that are tumors in the uterus. So it's definitely something you want to see your provider for. But just to know also that there are natural solutions for it is really important.
Yeah, totally. And I guess, as you're saying that with the bleeding, it feels like now it just like comes out of me. Like there's maybe just a day that it's crazy heavy, but the number of days it doesn't linger on as much, sort of thing. So yeah, what you were saying about that, yeah, definitely it doesn't seem as paced. The heavy bleeding
and if you think about it, Jamie, I mean, the uterus is a muscle, right?
Mm-hmm.
It's this little efficient pear-shaped muscle. And when we're 25, that muscle is nice and toned.
Mm-hmm.
And then we go on to have a few babies, and like every muscle in your body, as you get older, it's not so toned anymore.
Mm-hmm.
And so it doesn't have the ability to kind of shut off the bleeding as easily.
Right.
And it totally makes sense. So I call it like a boggy uterus or a weaker uterus that's not toned. And that's why that bleeding can sometimes kind of be like a ball rolling down the hill that gets out of control. Yeah. And that's why the ibuprofen can, make sure that ball doesn't roll too fast.
Sure.
So that's very effective for helping that heavy bleeding. Plus, again, like I said, progesterone. And there's other remedies as well. Even taking some nutritional supplements can actually help with the bleeding too.
Okay, cool, Teresa. Okay, there's two really important questions I want to ask that people asked me to make sure I asked you for this episode. Okay, I'm going to say the two questions and then you can answer in whatever order. Okay, so in perimenopause, menopause and beyond, low sex drive, and I'm going to connect that with like dry, really dry vagina, like really painful intercourse, low libido. I'm going to put that in together. And then one other question I want to ask too is for those who are trying to achieve pregnancy during this time in their 40s, what should they be aware of? Should they be deterred from it? Can they be encouraged? And if so, how do they prepare for that? So those would be my two that I want to make sure I ask.
Awesome. Okay. So as far as the low sex drive, I mean, sex drive is really complicated, but let's just take it from its simplest standpoint. When women are heading into the 40s, again, the body is, in a sense, like it's shutting down reproduction. It's getting ready to phase out of having babies. What gives us our most natural sex drive is that ovulation, the high hormones that we produce when we release that egg. So as we age and that changes, and especially in menopause, when it completely shuts off, the most powerful chemically based product that we make in those hormones is now not there. And so that makes a huge change in sex drive for a lot of women. But it's also just the declining testosterone levels as we age, and DHEA, which DHEA hormone is a precursor to both testosterone and estrogen, which we know also declines by, percentage points basically every year as soon as we hit 30 and beyond. So, having some of those levels tested can be important. There is ways to optimize some of those things for sex drive. If your DHEA is low, that can be sometimes supplemented. It can be sometimes helpful. Testosterone in some ways can be supplemented, but it's a very complex area, I would say. We have to address it very individually for each person, but there are answers. I'm not saying it's perfect, but and I think this area of medicine has been largely not taken care of well. Right. We have Vinegar for men and all sorts of things to address kind of issues with men, but we don't really talk about sex drive with women as often. And it is very important to women. They want their relationships and their intimacy to remain vital beyond having children. Mm-hmm. And so this is something that women really need to be vulnerable about and open up to their doctors about, and not accept that it's just okay to deal with it. I'm sorry, I don't really have any answers for you, so just deal with it. Mm-hmm. That's not the right answer. The right answer is I'm going to do whatever I can to support you to make this move in the right direction to make it better. So we know that, sex drive also can be decreased just because of the discomfort that can occur from vaginal dryness. This is a big issue for women. And so this is an easy thing to fix. So if you're suffering from vaginal dryness, there are non-hormonal options, there are hormonal options. So I definitely work with patients with this on a daily basis to find what they want in terms of a treatment to work best for them. But this is not something you need to suffer with, and it will make your life so much more comfortable, not just with intercourse, but just in general. Like I always joke, and we've talked about this, Jamie, nobody wants to be the grape that shriveled up into the raisin really quickly. And
Right.
so, when we lose our hormones, it's like sitting out in the sun and turning into a raisin to some degree. And again, at 45, I don't want that to happen.
Right.
So if there's some things that are safe and effective to help us stay plump, stay vital, stay energetic, then most women are really interested in knowing what those things are. So like I said, there are things to help with that. I would say the main herb kind of I use to help with sex drive is something called Tribulus. It's often used in South America. And I know of an OBGYN friend that trained with me years ago, and she said they use Tribulus all the time. That's their main medicinal treatment for low sex drive, and it's Tribulus. And so I'll have women take somewhere between 600 milligrams and 1,000 milligrams if they're really suffering from low sex drive. So that's just a kind of a little practical thing that someone could do on their own as well. Okay, so that second question, that's a big one too. And a lot of women wonder, like, is it okay to be exploring having a baby after 35? Like they're worried because the world tells you, oh, you're advanced maternal age. That sounds so horrible. I can't even stand the AMA, advanced maternal age thing.
Because you're at that at 35, right? Isn't that what they say?
Yeah, at 35, which seems so young. And the fact is more women are having their babies later. The average age of first baby right now is like close to 26 to 27. We have moved, from the earlier 20s now to later. So we know women are waiting to have children. So they're concerned, am I too old to have a baby? Or even if I've had, 2 or 3 children and now I'm over 35, is it still okay for me to have more children? Mm-hmm. And I think that is an individual question that has to be talked through with a provider that you trust. But if you are healthy and well, and you are being proactive with your health, then absolutely having children is still possible and is a good thing. Mm-hmm. I think there is some realistic things that people need to understand. And that's that after 35, the quality of women's eggs does change. That doesn't mean it's like you have, no eggs or, terrible eggs, but the quality can change. And so women are at higher risk for miscarriage because of that. And at age 40, this is just out kind of supportive treatment, but a woman is close to 40 to even 50% in some studies at risk for miscarriage. Mm-hmm. So that is something I think women just need to understand. Women often worry about genetic, abnormalities, and the risks are still overall very low for that, but they are higher as they're, percentage wise, the chances are higher as we get over 40. But I think that women need to know that if you are healthy and well and you talk to your provider and you're proactive, that you really can have a healthy pregnancy. I think it's important to address the cycle issues and the hormones. Mm-hmm. So you need to know, do I have low progesterone? Do I have low estrogen? Because if you really want to have a baby, you want to do everything you can to optimize your fertility, before going into that. And I think it's even more important after the age of 35. So charting your cycles is so important to see those changes that may show you have low hormone support. Mm-hmm. And then talking to somebody about how you can be proactive to treat that. I think it's important to know that you have to have, folate on board and other B vitamins that support our body and our mitochondria, and make sure that those cells are getting what they need to be normal and healthy. So whether that be being on a good prenatal vitamin or taking, folate on a daily basis, or a B vitamin. I actually love this B Right. It's called actually B Right, RIGHT, from Jarrow. It's just a methylated overall B complex. So you're looking for a great B vitamin. I really love that one. And then in terms of just, again, optimizing hormones, being on folate, just making sure you're doing everything you can to be healthy for pregnancy. And so working with a charting teacher is still really important, right, Jamie? I mean, a lot of times, like, we do NFP when we're young, we get to the older years and we kind of like, stop working with our NFP teachers, but that it can be really important too, to identify some of those changes.
100%. And for those who are working to avoid pregnancy, even like the system that we teach anyway, we can stand behind it and say it's very effective at avoiding pregnancy. I see so many women get on the pill, whether it's for their symptoms, whether they're still trying to avoid pregnancy, or they may, for the first time ever, start the pill in their perimenopause years. So can you speak to that, Teresa? I know we're kind of running out of time, but what would you say to those who have been told by their doctor that birth control is the solution?
Yeah, it's certainly understandable that when women feel that maybe their families are complete, that if they're using a natural system, there can be a little bit of a heightened anxiety around family planning. But what we know is the science is really good around the researched, fertility awareness-based methods like the Creighton model system, like the Marquette method, like Billings, like the symptothermal method. But it is important at that point. And just like I said, when women don't realize that they could ovulate earlier, to be recognized that your body is going to change and that it's going to be still extremely effective for you to chart. You do not need to be on birth control, but you have to be, I think, working with the teacher and really getting good and proper instruction to feel confident in being able to know your days of fertility. So I just, again, encourage knowing and understanding that the changes are going to be coming and working with your teachers on that. Also, there really is no person that I can't help if they have a difficult situation in terms of maybe their charting is hard to read. We have other methodologies sometimes to even help with the confidence of knowing their fertility. Like at the St. Paul VI Institute, we developed something called the Family Planning Progesterone Level that basically is 100% effective at telling somebody that they're now infertile. We have patients that use that on a monthly basis who have a very serious reason to avoid pregnancy in their 40s and beyond, and they use that every month. So, if you're in a situation where you have a very serious reason to avoid, know that there's people out there that are wanting to help you so that you can still use a natural system to avoid pregnancy. I would, before we, kind of wrap up, I do want to go back, Jamie, and just kind of, and maybe you have some ideas here, but I know the weight loss thing is, again, I almost feel like we need to go back to that one and just touch on some helpful, practical tips on weight loss and not weight loss, but really just healthy weight. How do we help when our hormones are kind of making it harder?
Totally. Yeah, let's do it. So I like how you said at the beginning how, we've always been told the science of weight loss is calories in, calories out. I mean, it's a science equation. But what Teresa was alluding to at the very beginning of our episode was that that's not always the case when it comes to hormone imbalance. It makes it very difficult to lose weight for women if there's a hormone imbalance. So in terms of addressing that, Teresa, what would you say are like your top 3 tips for women who are wanting to manage their weight during this time?
Yeah. So my top 3 tips would be making sure that you get proper hormone testing to make sure that your thyroid is functioning correctly and your cycle hormones are functioning correctly. Because if those levels are really not optimal, number one, if your thyroid's not optimal, then your metabolism is going to be slow and you're not going to be able to let your body burn energy the way that it should. Plus, you're just tired, so that doesn't help. But you have to feel good in order to lose weight. Number 2, I'm really a big fan of intermittent fasting, otherwise known as, that word can be kind of a buzzword, but it's basically a time restricted feeding window. Our gut has to do a lot of work on a daily basis. And it used to be that we thought that, eat 6 small meals a day, keep your blood sugars really stable throughout the day by eating all of these food throughout the day. But the science has really changed around that. And it's really better to let your gut rest and to let it work on other things in the body that are important and to heal the gut by letting it rest. So time restricted eating not eating until noon or not starting to eat until noon, something like that, and then finishing by 7 or 8 at the latest is really important, and can make women feel so much better in terms of that bloating in the abdomen and just feeling cleaner. That can be a huge thing. And then exercise is super important in terms of kind of changing the body up metabolically. So if you're someone who was a runner, or you do the Stairmaster, or you walk the treadmill, you probably need to change it up on the body. It likes muscle development in the 40s, and it likes core strengthening especially. So I love Pilates because of the core strengthening, and I love weightlifting for women as well, continuing to kind of balance that with a little bit of cardio. But you really do have to change it up in the exercise area, not just keep doing the same thing over and over. We know that muscle declines due to that DHEA and testosterone decline. We got to build that back up, which feeds energy to our body and our metabolism. I want to just give a couple, like we talked about in the PCOS episode, but this is a great supplement for my perimenopausal patients, is berberine. So again, when cortisol is high, we tend to have higher insulin levels, and blood sugar tends to be higher due to insulin resistance in many people. So berberine is a great supplement to help balance your blood sugars. It helps to clean the gut, keep the gut healthy. You can take 500 milligrams 3 times a day. Very safe, very effective, helps with that. I actually like apple cider vinegar. I personally kind of have leaned towards getting it even in capsule form, not actually drinking it straight up, the apple cider vinegar, because it's hard for me. So, but apple cider vinegar also just cleansing. I think lemon balm, like Jamie, I know with essential oils, is cleansing in this way too. Cleans the gut. It makes you feel like less water retention. It can help the metabolism a little bit as well. Magnesium, again, super important, and vitamin D. So just speaking to the things that we know are so important, you've got to optimize your vitamin D to help your thyroid. You've got to, magnesium is so important in terms of that calming of the brain and the body. I love natural calm, which you can get in a powder form. I love magnesium glycinate. You can take 400 milligrams at bedtime if you're not sleeping well. It helps amazing. It helps with headaches. So that's another tip in terms of a supplement. And I also notice if you're someone in perimenopause who's very anxious, and your anxiety is really building up, many times you are very low in B vitamins. And so getting a good B vitamin or supplementing with B12 or getting your B12 level checked. I've had several patients where I found very low B12, treated that, and their anxiety disappears. And this is common in premenopause. People wonder, like, can I just get everything in my diet? And I'm certainly a believer that we don't need to like load up on every supplement on earth, but our food is not as pure and nutrient dense as it used to be, right? And what people don't know is the most nutrient dense food that you could possibly eat is organ meat. It would be liver and heart. Like in terms of like off the charts, like organ meat would like put broccoli to shame every day. And so you really can't get sometimes enough nutrients from vegetables and fruits that we need for our body, especially in terms of iron and B vitamins and zinc and magnesium. And those things are the most dense in organ meats. And frankly, I just don't know a lot of people that are going out and buying liver and heart for dinner. Right. So, again, there are some of these things that in some people are really important to get, especially because guts are not as healthy. So those are just some tips in terms of, weight loss, intermittent fasting, getting some supplements sometimes that help with that insulin and metabolism, and eating a clean anti-inflammatory diet, just getting the sugar out. How many sugar addicts are out there? I know. I'm raising my hand. You can't see me. There are a lot of sugar addicts out there because it's pretty much in every food that we have. It's put in there to make you become addicted to it. So if you can switch that out and put dark chocolate in, dark chocolate is amazing. It actually calms the GABA center and creates serotonin. So that's a calming effect too. So.
Awesome. Oh my gosh, Teresa, I bet we could talk for 3 more hours on this. There's so much to say. There's so much to say, but I think hopefully, I know I learned a lot from you, Teresa, and I'm sure our listeners did too. And again, For those of you who are listening and you have a question, we didn't answer it, please just submit the question for us. Teresa and I are going to be doing Q&As on our social media. So stay tuned to those Q&As as well. But Teresa, thank you so much for answering all of these questions. And are there any last things, call to action that you want to call before we end the episode?
Well, not a call to action. I would say, like, just in case some of you were wondering about, like, we didn't touch on like hormone replacement in this episode. So that's probably one that we're going to have to touch on separately as the, menopause. We did touch on, like, again, you can get optimizing of your hormones through progesterone and, even some supplementing. So it is possible to use safe hormones in perimenopause. Talk to your, natural healthcare provider about that. But we will do a separate episode because I know a lot of you are wondering, are hormones safe? And can I take them safely? The answer is yes. I'm going to give you that, to get you excited. The answer is yes. I'm saying it's individual to every person. It's a personal decision for every person. But the answer is yes, that hormones can be safe. They have to be bioidentical and used appropriately, but we need to do an entire episode around that. So for those of you who thought, oh man, I really want to learn about hormone replacement or cooperative hormone replacement, we will do an episode on that.
Cool. Awesome, Teresa. Well, thank you so much for spending time with me this morning, Teresa. And thank you, listeners, for spending your time with us as well. Please be sure to share this episode with all the people in your life, all the loved ones in your life who really need this information. Have a great day, guys.